It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Smooth and Savvy is joined by some of the hottest talent in the entertainment industry, from musicians to authors and all those in between. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here he is, Mr. Smooth and Savvy himself, Douglas Coleman.
Hello. How are you? Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. Nice to have you here. Another great show for you today. This show is about a new movie that's called Glory Days, The Life and Times of Michael Alig. And Michael Alig, in case you don't know, was an American former club promoter, musician, and writer who was one of the founding members of the Club Kids, which was a group in New York City back in the late 80s or early 90s. They wore outrageous costumes and promoted wild parties at clubs. Club scene in New York City back then was quite a bit different than it is now. Now it's very corporate and very expensive. Back in those days, it was cheap and pretty much a free-for-all. Anything goes. Ramon Fernandez, who is a filmmaker and an actor, has created a film based on the life of Michael Alig. So, very excited about this show. Ramon will be up first, followed by Michael. We've got both of them here today. But first, before we get to the interviews, we've got a song. This one is a Music X-Ray submission. The band is called Grandpa's Chili. Chili is in the dish, C-H-I-L-I, not chili as in Grandpa's cold. And the song is called Friends of Johnny. So I'm going to play the song first and then straight in to the interviews.
I'm a friend of Johnny's. We played with you last night. Oh, show me that, man, I wasn't feeling right. I'm a friend of Johnny. I'm a friend of Johnny's. We grew up in the haze. Johnny. Well, you remember Johnny? He's the guy who's in that band, and he said you were good people and could lend a friend a hand. I'm a friend of Johnny, but he had to catch a train, and you know a little slice of pizza would be so nice. Could you spare me? Spare a little change. It struck me for a moment, and I guess it crossed my mind that I could have left him hanging like I didn't have the time. But he looked a little ragged with the blanket on his back, and I knew another slice of pizza wouldn't tip me back. Besides, I do remember Johnny like it was only yesterday, and I handed him a buck and I wish him good luck. With a smile and walked away. I'm a friend of Johnny's, and I guess it isn't strange that there's a lot of friends of Johnny out there looking for some change. A lot of friends of Johnny out there.
Okay, please welcome Ramon Fernandez. Hi, Ramon. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Good to hear from you.
Yes, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Looking over your bio, it looks pretty interesting. You were born and raised in Madrid, Spain.
That is correct.
And your father was a matador?
That's right. That's right. And I guess not too many people can say that.
I don't think I've ever had anybody on whose father was a matador, actually.
Oh, well, perfect. There you go. It's a first for everything.
Did you go to a lot of bullfights as kids?
I went to a few, yes. I went to a few. It was sort of part of the culture. I know that now it's not very popular to even mention that word, but yes, it was a big part of my upbringing. And I think that's maybe part of the reason I became an actor. I think that whole need for applause might have translated in the genes. But I get to live, when I perform. I don't have to worry about getting killed.
Well,
but,
that's true, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, I guess.
I wanted to ask you one thing about bullfighting, is that the matador, I mean, you were talking about it being a show. It's as much of a show as it is a sport, though, and with dire consequences for the matador if he gets gored, yeah?
Yeah, it's a more of a we consider it an art form, more along the lines of painting and sculpting than it is a sport. And you also have to remember that everything gets used when a bull gets. It's not so much about dehumanizing a bull or anything like that, about putting him down. It's really about showing what a majestic animal this is, and rather than kill it with electroshocks like mostly it's done, you dress up in gold and you go out there and give it a good death, and you dress up and kill it with a sword and give it a chance and give it a proper death, for such a majestic animal. So it's really a praise for the bull, which is often misunderstood.
But the matador doesn't always win, does he?
No, not always, and that's part of the thing, So it can go either way, and that's part of the thrill of going to see a fight, is that you never really know what's going to happen.
Do people bet on bullfights?
I bet they do. I bet they do. Yeah, I bet they do.
Not but, officially, though, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, but yeah, it's a big tradition, but it is disappearing little by little. I don't think Hemingway would be very happy with the state of affairs today.
You were born in Madrid, and then when did you move to the U.S.?
I moved to the U.S. Right after high school, and I came here for college. I went to college in Rhode Island. I studied theater in London. I took a semester also. I went to Moscow, learned Russian. So that was a very interesting time. The wall had just come down. Oh. And then in 1994, when I graduated, I came to New York City with a business degree and went straight to Wall Street. And hated every minute of it. Yeah.
Your story is funny. It's similar to my story, but I started studying acting when I was 18. I was at the American Academy of Dramatic Art in New York.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's a great school.
But I was more interested in being a musician. That was really my passion.
Oh, wow, great.
They kind of cross over. I mean, being an actor, it's a performing artist.
I always said if I could make music, I wouldn't be an actor, because that is the closest connection that one can have to an audience. They also say that, every actor wants to be a rock star and every musician wants to be
an actor.
To act. So, none of us are ever happy.
But anyways, so I was doing that, and then some situations happened. My father got sick. I had to go back. I'm originally from Boston.
Okay, so was my mother.
Oh, okay. So
he's from Brighton.
Oh, fabulous. So anyways, then I went back, and with some heavy persuasion from my mother, she kind of convinced me to, stop all this foolishness about being an actor or being a musician and go get a real job.
Oh, dear. Don't they always do that?
Yeah. So anyways, I worked in finance for 20 years.
Oh, wow. Look at you.
Yeah.
No kidding. So, yeah, we do have similarities here.
But now
eventually you pursued other dreams, did you?
Well, now I've come back. Now after the 20 years there, I retired from that, and then I went back to my music.
Oh, good man.
As a result of the music, the radio show came out. So it's been, it's sort of how this business is, and where this connects to this, connects to this, connects to this.
Precisely.
And so now it's the radio show. So.
Oh, well, congratulations. You came full circle, my friend.
I did, absolutely.
Good man.
Okay, so you are an actor You were in quite a few things here. I'm looking at your sheet. Law and Order, All My Children, Lie to Me.
Oh yeah, that's a rite of passage for any New York actor. You got to do a few of those.
You got to do the soap operas, right? That's the
yes, it's terrific. I just finished the first episode of the new season of the Blacklist, and I am currently in New York shooting something for Marvel that I can't talk about because I signed an NDA.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I get busy. I play a lot of heavies, as they say in the business, a lot of bad guys.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good.
It's fun.
One of the ones that you were in, I wanted to ask you about the film because I just read it real quick on IMDb, and it sounded really interesting, was The Visitor?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was a terrific film. It was up for an Academy Award.
Tell me a little about the film.
Well, Richard Jenkins did a terrific role, and he was up for an Academy Award for that. And we had, I forget the director's name, but he just won the Oscar this last year for Best Film of the Year. And it was absolutely great to work on a sort of small independent piece, the sort of the little movie that could. And I'm very proud of it. Yeah, even though I'm play the guy that sort of screws everything up. I play the cop that arrests the lead actor, and it all spirals downhill from there. But somebody had to do it. But yeah, it's one of those movies that'll stand the test of time.
I'll have to watch that one because it looked real interesting, the whole premise of it.
Yeah, Todd McCarthy, yeah, he's the one who directed it. He's terrific.
So the people just show up in this guy's apartment, and
yeah, this guy basically he has a second home in New York, and he comes home one day, and there's some immigrants living in his house. And, they changed each other's lives for the better. They sort of opened him up from being a bit of a stiff. And it's got a lot of humanity to it. And Todd is really good with those sort of stories.
Now, it says you speak 4 languages, which is pretty amazing. Now, I've talked to people who were multilingual, and they said it's the second language is the hardest one. Once you get over that one, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the 10th.
Yeah. Well, this is the benefit of growing up in Europe. It's all sort of bunched in together. You forget that the distance between New York and Boston. From Spain, you'd be in Germany.
Exactly.
It's all kind of mixed. And I grew up bilingual. My mother's from Boston, but I grew up in Spain, so I immediately had 2 of them. And I didn't know sort of the difference because I spoke it at home. So it was sort of like the language I spoke with mom, and then when I moved to the States, I realized there's a whole country that speaks that, and then, she had instilled languages in me from an early age. The younger that you get to it, the better. So I, went on to French, and that sort of, you're right, which to me would have been the second one. If you consider English and Spanish one language for me. And then that gave me the courage years later to travel to Russia and go learn Russian, which was daunting because there is no Latin base or Anglo-Saxon base. It's Slavic, and you really have to start from scratch. But it's fun, yeah. And, when you speak 4 languages, they're always kind of competing in your head. You're always kind of, running different languages in your head. So it's an interesting way to live, but I don't know any other way, so I can't compare it.
What language do you dream in?
I dream in both English and Spanish. I dream in Spanish when I'm in Spain. After speaking of, after a week, speaking any one language, you'll start to dream in that language, but mostly in English.
Well, let's get to the film. The film is called Glory Days, The Life and Times of Michael Alig. How did you get interested in Michael Alig and his whole story?
Well, I'll tell you, when I first came to New York, and I was working Wall Street, I sort of led a double life. I used to go to there was huge clubs in New York at the time that you could not get away with now because of the rent. There were entire city blocks with 10,000 people in, it was just absolute madness. It was Disneyland for adults. And it was the great equalizer. It really didn't matter how much money you had. They only let people into those clubs that sort of did something for the room. You had to know how to dress a certain way. You had to be sort of into electronic music. And his parties were always the best and the most extravagant. They used to spend a lot of money to entertain people back then. Now it's the other way around. They want the people to spend the money. You have to buy bottles and so on and so forth. So when all that disappeared, I just, after, Giuliani came to town and especially after 9/11, that was just sort of it. That was the end of fun. So I basically was just always fascinated with whatever happened to Michael Alig, and 20 years had gone by, and I just sort of decided, well, somebody has to make the story, and I just forged along and went and did it.
You went to some of his parties?
Oh yes, I was in New York from '94 until basically the time that until the time that it all disappeared. So I caught the tail end of it. I caught the last sort of 6 years, and I tell you, it was a different New York back then.
Did you get to meet him when you were there? I mean, during that
No,
time?
not back in the day. No, I first met him when he agreed to do the documentary, and I sat across from him in prison and decided that we were going to go ahead and do this. I always knew of him, and I knew about the case, but I was never involved in his inner circle or anything like that.
How does your film differ from Party Monster? I mean, Party Monster obviously was
right.
a depiction, and yours is a documentary, but are they competing at all?
I wouldn't say we're competing. Party Monster is a film that was made sort of at the time when this happened, and it's partly fiction. In fact, the director of Party Monster is in my film, and the curious thing is that Alig hadn't seen the movie in the 17 years that he was incarcerated. So when he got out, I actually sat him down and made him watch it, and I put the cameras on him to get his reaction of the picture. So I sort of encompass the whole thing, and this is I guess you could call this a bookend to Party Monster, because we see him coming out of prison. But Party Monster is a classic, cult film that is very revered by a lot of people. So I have no competition as far as that. I mean, that's not my mindset. I really wanted to just tell the story, and I thought that we could go into a lot more detail than what had been done before.
How long did it take you to put this all together? When did you start on the film, actually?
The film, it took me 8 years to put this together. 7 years of shooting and about 10 months to cut it, which I did by myself in my living room, which was remind me never to do that again.
That's a lot of work.
Damn near went crazy, but I did everything, and I typed the credits. I put the music down. I bought every photo and every piece of old footage that I could find, and sort of little by little just built this audiovisual symphony. I'm pretty happy with it. But yeah, it took a while. The other thing is that when I first started, Michael Alig was supposed to get out of prison within 2 years. So I figured I'd had a couple of years to sort of put this thing together. But for whatever reasons, they kept adding time to his sentence, and for various offenses that he would get in trouble for. And so they just kept adding more and more time, which allowed me, coincidentally, the time to acquire more and more interviewees. So that's why the film is so dense and packed with these really colorful characters. I ended up with 43 interviews.
Wow.
Yeah, and they're all very eccentric.
Well, if they're anything like Alig, they would have to be, right?
Oh, yes.
Where was the first place you started with this? Did you start with him?
Yeah, I knew that it would have to go from the top down. I knew that, he was once their leader, and I knew that once he agreed to it, I figured everybody else would fall into place. And then the more that people spoke, it created a sort of radiation, it's like, well, this person speaks, well, I want my point of view done. And so I didn't have too much of a hard time. It was mostly protocol and timing and getting people in the right place, in the right setting, in the right location, and with the right cameras and so on and so forth. And once that happens, then it flew, and we just started collecting these wonderful interviews. I mean, I've used maybe 5% of what I shot. I could make 3 more movies with the material that I have. Not that I will, but it was, pretty comprehensive. But yeah, I had to start with him. And so the way that it happened was I was talking to my producing partner, Lisa Brubaker, and said, I just, as a conversation, I wonder what ever happened to Michael Alig. And she said, well, I know somebody who still visits him in prison. And I said, well, send a message with this person, Steve Lewis, asking whether or not he'd like a documentary made. I'd never made a documentary in my life. I'm an actor. And then months later, months went by, I completely forgot about it. And she came back and she said, hey, he said yes. I said, who? She said, Michael Alig. So we rented a car and drove up to the border of Canada and sat across from him. And he said, yeah, let's do it. He was kind of forgotten at the time. And so I kind of jumped the gun and went for it, and here we are.
How did you fund this project, or did you fund it yourself?
We funded part of it ourselves, yes. We put everything sort of that we had into it, and then we raised I had to raise a little bit of money for post-production, for licensing, and so on and so forth. But it didn't. Considering what most documentaries of this caliber cost, it really came down to a fraction of that.
Well, the film is called Glory Days, The Life and Times of Michael Alig. It has been released. It's on, where is it available?
It is out on iTunes. It is out on Amazon. It is out on Google Play. It is out on many, many others. If you just look for it, it'll pop up on one platform or another. We have about 10 of them. So it's everywhere. And you can look at the preview is out on YouTube. It's also playing on YouTube Pay. So it's widely available, and the reviews are coming in, and they're terrific. I'm over the moon.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, best of luck with that.
Thank you so much.
What are you going to do next?
After I'm done shooting this Marvel film, I'm going to go back to Los Angeles and sort of bask in all of this. But I do have a screenplay that I'm writing now that I'd like to shoot next year as a narrative. It'll be my first time out as a film director in narrative capacity. So I'm looking forward to that.
Is that a normal transition for actors to go into directing and writing? It seems like a lot do.
Yes, some do. Yes, absolutely. The problem is that they become usually a little overindulgent, and but they never know when to cut. But yes, absolutely, it was great to do that little transition and to be taken seriously on another level rather than just an actor. Not I will always be a performer and I will always love acting. It'll be my first passion. But storytelling at large is great to be able to do it from all angles. Yeah, so I'm very happy about that.
Well, terrific. Well, Ramon, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for promoting the film for me, and good luck with the show, boss.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Go listen, download, and subscribe to The Douglas Coleman Show. It's available at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS. Also on iTunes, Spreaker, and YouTube. The Douglas Coleman Show is an internationally syndicated talk and music show that features fascinating and sometimes famous guests from all aspects of the entertainment industry. The topics can range from light and fluffy to sober and serious. Our focus is on music artists, but we also feature producers, authors, directors, and even promoters. The Douglas Coleman Show. Sometimes chat, sometimes music, always entertaining. Again, it's available today at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS. You can also connect with them on Facebook at Douglas Coleman Show 1, follow on Twitter at Douglas Coleman 3, and you can even find them on TuneIn Radio. Again, that's the Douglas Coleman Show at the website douglascolemanmusic.com/DCS, iTunes, Spreaker, YouTube, and more. Go listen, download, subscribe, and share with your social networks today.
In-house production and recording in Louisiana Publishing Company is now offering a special for podcasters on their CD Pro Radio network. For just $20 a month, CD Pro Radio will broadcast your podcast twice a week on their network. This is a great and inexpensive opportunity for podcasters to gain some exposure for their show without having to spend a lot of money. Please check them out at cdproradio.com. That's cdproradio.com.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. See? Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Wrong hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome Michael Alig. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Well, I've got a lot of questions to ask you.
I'm sure.
Your life has been documented on several films, and now there's a new one that Ramon has done called Glory Days, The Life and Times of Michael Alig. The one thing that he told me that I was kind of surprised about was that you had not seen Party Monster until very recently.
The movie, you mean, not the documentary?
The movie, right, with Macaulay Culkin. And,
right.
When did you watch that for the first time?
2015.
How accurate was that movie? Because I've watched that movie a couple of times. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good film. But was that really...
I mean, I guess it's enjoyable if you're interested in seeing, what the clothes were like back then, or like what the music was like, or the party scene, or whatever. But besides that, not the story is not very fictionalized, and it's very Hollywoodized, and they kind of combined a lot of characters to save time and make the plot run, make the storyline run faster and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff that just isn't accurate. But I mean, I don't think anybody really cares, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's a movie. If it was a documentary, it would be one thing. But, it's a movie, so I don't think anybody really expects it to be completely accurate.
Well, true. I mean, Hollywood does take liberties with, any stories like that. They kind of base it on an idea, and then the idea just grows and grows legs of its own pretty much when you start getting people
the reality was that they had to, usually in a situation like this, they have to kind of exaggerate in order to make it more exciting or whatever. But they actually had to tone down almost every story because the directors thought that nobody would believe the truth. So they had to kind of lessen the severity or the extremism of most of the stories.
So your assessment of the thing was basically that it was just sort of a Hollywood creation and not really what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get any depth of any. I didn't get to know the characters. I didn't get to, particularly care what happened to them. It was just, when you don't get to know the characters, you don't care what happens to them. And so it wasn't, I wasn't moved. Maybe that was because I was too close to it. I don't know.
Now, were you consulted at all when they made that film?
Yeah, they took it loosely. It was a combination of my manuscript for my autobiography and James's book, Disco Bloodbath, and it was kind of a loose adaptation of both of them. They made it more of an adaptation of James's book, I think, because James works for them and they could control the story that way. A lot of it was lifted almost, directly out of my autobiography.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your relationship with James St. James. First of all, how did you meet him? What was the story of your meeting?
At Danceteria, I'm not exactly sure what the exact circumstances are, but I know that he was a regular fixture there, and he and James St. James and Michael Musto were, he and Andy Anderson and Michael Musto were kind of the Three Musketeers. They were out every night together, and I was very jealous because at the time Michael Musto was relevant, and he had a column in the Village Voice that was, La Dolce Musto, that was really kind of the epitome of what you needed to be in. And I know it kind of sounds ridiculous now to say something like this because there's nothing really like this now. I guess, I don't know, something online, some kind of like cool online blog maybe might be the same, but there's nothing really like it now. So it's hard for a lot of people to understand why it was so important. But to have all three of them together, you just knew that James was going to be written up all the time in his column, and so was Andy, and it was just infuriating to me.
Well, because again, I'm going with Party Monster and the way that they portrayed your characters. It was kind of like a love-hate relationship between you two. On the one hand,
with James?
Yeah, with James. I mean, on the one hand, you guys were roommates, and were sort of.
No, we never. That
was made up too.
Yeah. We never lived together. Oh my God, I can't even imagine.
So then what is
he lived with Kyoki for a while.
What is the relationship between you and him, or what was it? Were you guys good friends, or were you rivals, or kind of both, or what?
We were sort of rivals back then. Now, I mean, he's doing such a different thing that, like, I can't imagine we would be. I mean, I was jealous when I found out that his book was optioned by Drew Barrymore and Sting's wife. And so while everybody else was celebrating, I was kind of not. But I mean, I'm happy for him in a way. But I mean, there's also an element of he kind of profited from something that was not probably a good thing to profit from. Although his argument is that he wrote the story and he he made the effort and took the time to write the story, which I know how hard it is to write a story like that. Although, then, go back and forth. His argument is that, the story was kind of written for him. He didn't really have it's not like something that's fiction that you have to make up some stuff. So it was kind of written for him.
Well, all of this was going on while you were in prison, right?
Yeah, but the story had happened before that.
Right, but I mean, your ability to do anything outside in terms of getting stories published or whatever in prison is going to be pretty limited, I would think.
I don't think so. I mean, they overturned that in 1993. There was a law about it. They made a law against it before 1993, and then they overturned it in 1993.
So it's possible that you could do writing and get things published while still incarcerated?
Yes, I did actually. I got a few things published while I was incarcerated, but not like autobiographical things. Well, sort of stories about prison life and stuff like that.
What was your prison life like?
I don't think it was kind of very typical of what most people who went to prison would be like, because Freeze and I were there. I don't know what it's called, but it's the opposite of a separation order. A lot of times when two co-defendants go in together, the judge will put a separation order on them so that they don't see each other in prison. Generally, it's because there's some kind of animosity between the two, and they don't want any kind of fighting or whatever. But with us, he made the opposite, and he said that he wanted us to be housed next to each other, because he felt that we would both be there would be such a kind of culture shock of us going there that we would probably benefit psychologically from having each other as kind of a support system. So we were neighbors for a very long time. And we got kind of sick of each other, actually. And now the irony is that now that we're home, we are not allowed to speak to each other until November, which is when our parole ends.
Let me back up a little bit just to give people a little bit of background of your story. You grew up in Indiana, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you graduated high school, you moved to New York City. You started in at the clubs. You kind of created this thing called the Club Kids.
Mm-hmm. That took about 3 years.
3 years. Okay. When I'm reading through this, now this was, keep in mind for people listening, that this was well before the internet and social media,
mm-hmm.
but you guys were kind of like live social media, weren't you?
Yeah, it's kind of hard for people to comprehend that, because especially if you were born into a world where social media is so prevalent, it's kind of hard to imagine a world without it. It's kind of like us, imagining a world without, I don't know, TV and stuff like that. So it must seem kind of like another world to them.
What you guys did actually was you dressed up in crazy clothes, crazy makeup. How did you get the word, or how did the word start to spread that, Michael Alig's parties were the place to be in New York at that time? How did that happen?
Just us. I mean, it was just us pounding the pavement and printing up, tens of thousands of invitations for parties. I mean, the return that you get on an invitation, well, when I first started, the return wasn't so bad. It was something like, you print something like, 2,000 invitations for a party that you might want to have, 300 people, or maybe 200 people. But it really got so bad because the competition was very stiff at the time. And every club, we had 4 clubs, and then there were 4 or 5 other large clubs. So we were all competing for the same crowd. And so everybody was getting, 10 invitations a day. And, so the competition was very stiff, and we would have to print sometimes 20,000 invitations to get to, 200 or 300 people.
So were you guys exclusive as to the type of people that you would let in the club? I'm thinking of, like Studio 54, where Steve Rubell would only let in the fashionable
Studio 54
crowd.
it's a myth. People think that it was like, some fabulous club, and it was in a way, because it was the first of its kind. But and the door policy thing and everything. But it was kind of the emperor's new clothes. I mean, almost anybody was allowed into Studio 54. Eventually, they just may have had to wait a little while. And they didn't wait because it was so crowded inside. Usually they waited because the doorman wanted to create a scene. So, and inside, if you look at pictures of Studio 54, you see kind of 500 or 1,000 really awful Guidos. Like with their shirts unbuttoned and like, silk shirts and like stuff like that.
Right.
And then Liza Minnelli and Andy Warhol and Michael Jackson and Diana Ross, So, but besides that, it was like, not a great crowd. Whereas when you came, flash forward 20 years and you go to a club like Tunnel with 6,000 people in it, really all 6,000 people were great people.
This was at a time, I'm trying to think back, this was like electronic music was just starting. You had a bunch of people dressed in crazy costumes, crazy makeup. I guess it was anything goes, right? It was sexuality, it was gay, straight, bi, whatever, right?
And that was really important because we didn't want it to be a gay club any more than we wanted to be a straight club. I think they're both kind of just as, one is no better than the other. In fact, it's kind of worse to have a gay club that does. I hate gay clubs that don't allow straight people in them because it's setting such a terrible example. And it's kind of like, black people having parties now where they don't, where they discriminate against whites. And, well, which they do, But we didn't want to set that example.
Well, I agree with you. I think that, clubs should just have everybody in.
Yeah.
Because, to have this kind of discriminatory policy just breeds hatred towards, whichever
And also,
group.
to make the decision based upon who you sleep with is a really weird way of deciding who gets in the nightclub.
Very true. Yeah. Rather than have a dress code, they have a sexual orientation code at the door.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We got a lot of slack. Like our clubs would be attacked by the gay crowd because they said that we were too straight, and the straight crowd basically said that we were too gay. So, it's that thing where, like Obama said, that when everybody hates you and everybody thinks you're doing it the wrong way, that means you're doing it the right way.
So these clubs, aside from the music and the crazy dressing and stuff, there were a lot of drug activities going on. People were doing.
There was not in the beginning, but eventually there was. I would say that started around 91.
How down the rabbit hole did you go with the drugs?
Well, it happened very quickly, and it was kind of like those things that you run on a treadmill, and the treadmill kept going faster and faster, and as the speed would go up, we were required to run faster and faster and to offer more and more, because the more clubs that were opened at one time, there were something like 15 gigantic clubs in the city. And if we wanted to compete with them, then, after a club is usually only good for six months to a year. And, after that, if you want to keep those people there, you really have to offer them more and more and more and more. And every time a new club opens, you have to offer them something else. So it was, at first we paid them to come, and then we paid them to come and we gave them free drinks, and then we paid them to come and gave them free drinks and free dinners, and then we paid them to come and give them free drinks and free dinners about their drugs. And, it was getting to the point where it was cost prohibitive to even have them there anymore.
So how did you make a living doing this?
Ultimately, the clubs, because of those people, the clubs made a lot of money. So there was a lot of money coming in, and I didn't actually make a lot of money. I didn't make as much as I should have been making. I didn't know really enough about it at the time, and I didn't know that I should have been asking for a lot more. But there were other promoters that were doing far less than I was, that were, in fact, working for me and making more money than I was. So
were you getting paid by Peter?
Yes.
All right. So he kind of kept the thing going with you. And did you get a title? What were you called?
I was the director of the club.
Director, okay.
So was Stephen Lewis, though, so we were, I guess, co-directors.
And then at some point in all of this, there was a murder, and you and Freeze went to prison for 17 years. Now, you got out in 2014, is that correct?
Yes.
One of the things that Ramon said, which I thought was interesting that I wanted to ask you about, is that you went into prison right at the infancy of the internet. And when you came out, it's like full-blown, the whole world has changed now. How have you adapted to internet and social media and this whole new world that we're living in now?
I haven't completely. I find because I don't have the basics. It's hard to kind of build on it, like when they have all these updates on apps and everything. I never really understood the basics, so it's hard for me to understand what the point is of an update. And that's a problem because I probably, it would have benefited me or society maybe to have had some kind of computer classes in prison, but they don't offer anything like that. And in fact, you're not allowed to have computers in within the walls of the prison because they're afraid that even if they're not connected to the internet, because they're afraid the inmates, that's how stupid they are, because they think that even if the computer isn't attached to the internet, that they can still figure out a way to, fudge their records or, make release papers or, whatever.
Oh, they think the prisoners are going to try to hack into the system somehow.
Right.
With it.
Right.
When you got out, what was your first experience with the computer?
I guess James sitting next to me with his iPhone. My first experience with the computer was when I got home. I was staying with my friend Ernie, and I had an iPhone and I had a MacBook, and the MacBooks at the time had this kind of secret button in the upper right-hand corner that you had to really look for it. It didn't say on and off, and it was flush with the computer, so you didn't see it. Yeah. And so I didn't know how to turn the computer on, and I waited days and days before because I was embarrassed to ask how to turn the computer on. So, and then my phone kept vibrating. It was on vibrate, and I didn't know. I kept hanging up on people when they would call because I didn't understand that you were supposed to swipe. I kept pushing the button and it would hang it up. And, so people were calling me and hearing me, cursing the phone and then hanging up on them. And so I had to go out. I had to go out to a I figured, well, I'll go out to a payphone and I'll call my editor and ask her, how to answer the phone. So, well, first I went out on the street corner in the Bronx and just stood on the street corner with my phone ringing and asked anybody passing by if they knew how to answer the phone. And nobody would stop and answer the phone for me because they thought either I was crazy or they thought I was going to try and rob them or whatever. So I had to go to a store and I got change for $1, and I found out that phones used to be $0.25 and now they're 50 cents, I guess. And if you can find one. And when I put the first 50 cents in, it didn't work. The phone was all dead, and everybody was looking at me like I was crazy for using a payphone. And then I had to put another 50 cents in, and then I was just starting to explain to Esther what the problem was, and the phone went dead. And apparently, you only get a minute or 120 seconds for 50 cents. So I mean, it was kind of Twilight Zone-y for a while there.
So technology has been a little bit challenging for you to suddenly appear back into the world with all of this craziness that happened.
It was at first, but like I said, because without the foundation, you don't get the all the new stuff that's happening. If you don't really understand the foundation of it, then it's hard to build upon that.
Right, exactly. With us, it's like we started out with Windows 1. And then the first cell phones, and then we just graduated to the next level. But you're starting like right at the top. And so all the stuff that happened before.
So many things that are obvious, that are so obvious to so many people, and they're so obvious that they never told me that they existed. Like, forwarding emails. It took me probably a year to figure out that you could forward an email. And up until then, I was copying and it took a long time to learn about copying and pasting, but I would copy and paste the email and then send it to somebody else instead of forwarding it. So, just little things like that are so normal that everybody knows them. And so they just assumed that I would too.
Right. Well, that's interesting. What are you doing now? What are you putting your life to? Because you lost 17 years of it. So you have to kind of start over, when you come out of prison.
Sort of, but I mean, it's hard the second time around because you've got all that years of knowledge, and then you've got all the connections you've made, and you've got hopefully that you made, and you've got just the skills in whatever profession you're in. So it's kind of if I moved to New York right now as a teenager, I don't think it would. I think it would be almost impossible to start something to get, it's impossible to get attention. It's impossible to get, shelf footage on the, shelf placement in stores. It's impossible to get media attention. It's impossible to get, to build any kind of brand right now because there's so many coming at you, and the people who are doing them all have a lot of money and a lot of expertise and a lot of, money behind them maybe, or maybe even a larger conglomeration behind them. So they're just kind of benefiting off of their own media. So it's hard for, people, New York used to be a place where literally you could come and go, make a movie yourself and take it to one of the theaters on 42nd Street and meet with, maybe the father of the family who, or the grandfather of the family who owned the theater. And if they liked the movie, they would show it. And, now all of those theaters have been bought up by, Lowe's and General Cinema and whatever.
Right.
So, you don't get that anymore. Now they have to play the same movies that are playing in the shopping malls, and then 42nd Street loses all of its character.
Right, exactly. Well, 42nd Street has completely changed. I mean, I used to live in New York City in the early 80s, and it's nothing like what it was back then. The whole situation.
Well, actually, it's getting a little bit better, I think, or maybe a lot of it never went away. I was writing for a while for the New York Post, and every time I would, they would have me. Well, first they would give me the stories that they wanted me to write. And then later on, they wanted me to pitch the ideas myself. And every idea that I pitched them, they said was too thinky for the New York Post crowd. So, none of the ones I pitched ever got, published. But one of them I wanted to write, and I thought it was a really good story, was that everybody loves to complain about the new Times Square and how it's, not what it used to be, and how it's no longer shocking, and, all the sex clubs are gone and everything. And that's true. But, remnants of the old Times Square, there's a saying somewhere, you can take something out of Times Square. I guess you could take the shadiness out of Times Square, but you can't take Times Square out of the shadiness, or something, maybe it's the opposite of that. But, because if you notice, all of the, characters now that are playing like Elmo and, Minnie Mouse and everything that you have your picture taken with the Times Square, those are all the people who are being arrested for molesting children and selling drugs and whatever.
That, yeah.
So now they've still got those same creepy people there. They're just dressed as Disney characters. But even better, I was walking up 8th Avenue just kind of for the sake of, walking up memory's sake, nostalgia's sake, and I came across this bookshop, or not a bookshop, a video shop. And nowadays, I think the law is you have to be something like 75% family content in order to, have a video store. So you go to these stores in Times Square that look like family video stores, with like Little Mermaid and Shaggy DA and whatever videos, but nobody's buying them. And if you go behind them, you go to like the, Debbie Does Dallas and the Bestiality and stuff like that. But I saw this place that looked like a family video store, and I went in because on the window it said men's area downstairs, and I didn't know exactly. It sounded weird. It didn't sound like like gay videos. It said men's area, and it was just a very interesting way of putting it. So I went in and I looked, and when I got down there was nothing down there except more Little Mermaid and Disney videos. But at the end of the room, there was a gate that came down, and behind the gate were just a bunch of boxes hacked up, piled up, and in like what looked like a storage room, and it was dark in there. And I didn't really think twice about it, and then all of a sudden I saw a man crawling out from underneath the gate and kind of looking around, and then walking upstairs and leaving. And then pretty soon another man came crawling out, and I figured it was a dark room back there, which I don't think New York has seen in a very long time. And I went and I told Margie, she was my editor at the Post, I told her about it. She thought it was a great story, but she didn't like my angle, which was more of a sociology kind of angle. So they said they were going to take care of it themselves. But when I went back the next week, they were charging $50 to go back. So there is still stuff like that going on.
It's just not right on the street. you've got to kind of
Right.
go down into the basement to find it now. Yeah.
Right.
All right. So you're working now as a writer. You're doing different writing jobs. What else are you doing?
The most important thing is I'm doing a clothing line called Scrotal Face, which is going to be coming out in February. And it's got about 45 pieces in it. And it's, I think it's actually very good for somebody who's never put together a clothing line. And I'm very excited about it. I'm working with Sushi and Artie. It's called Number 16. They were the buyers of for Pat Field. And originally, this deal was made about a year ago. I met with Pat, and we decided that we would sell exclusively at her store, which would kind of give us some cachet, and then we would sell in Kitson in London, in LA, and then Colette in Paris, and then I forget another store in London, and just sell maybe in Westwood and just sell in those 4 stores. Now Pat's retired, so we're not going to do that. But we have all of the people from Pat's store now who are behind Scrotal Face. So I think that's really good. That's going to help us at the trade shows. Some of the designs are, they've watered down a little bit too much for my liking, but they allowed me to have, there's 6 series of clothing, of designs, and they allowed me to have 2 of them as far as extreme as I want, and then 2 of them are kind of mainstream, and then 2 of them are kind of in the middle. But I really like it. I'm really proud of it. I can't wait for it to come out. Then there's something called Scrotal Squad, which is a kind of a spin-off of Scrotal Face, and Scrotal Squad is an online army of like-minded people, something like what we did with the Club Kids in Manhattan in the 80s and 90s. But now, because of the internet, we are able to do it all over the world. So we have representatives in London and Paris and Berlin and all the major cities, and even some of the not major cities, Kansas City and Toledo and places like that. And when you go to scrotalsquad.com, we haven't launched yet. We're going to launch in about 2 weeks, but you can still go to the site and you can see what's happening. We're launching. We've had a soft launch because we're kind of learning as we go. But it's a combination of way to hear about cool and underground events on the scene, and who is the fabulous designer of London, or what's the great party in Paris, or whatever. And then on the other hand, there's mentorship and counseling services for people who, even in this day and age, I get emails from kids that are just fucking heartbreaking, living in the UK. They're transgendered, they're beaten up in school, they don't know how to tell their parents, and they're hoping that Scrotal Squad will be their family, which it will be,
Right.
Just like the Club Kids were. So it's the same thing, only it's online, and there's more of us now. So
Wow, that's great.
and I'm writing 2 books, and promoting 2 documentaries, and I've got 3 screenplays I'm trying to sell, and I paint, and so I'm doing a bunch of stuff. And I'm directing a nightclub.
And you're directing. Well, it sounds like you're kind of back in the swing of things.
Yeah, but I may be doing too much. I just recently signed on with this company, kind of helps prioritize when you've got a lot of projects. They really did pare it down, and they said that what I was doing is actually 10 years worth of projects, and so they've kind of spread everything out and given me launch dates and deadlines and stuff like that. And we're starting with the top priorities, which are Scrotal Squad, Scrotal Face, and we're doing a satire of The View called The Pew, which we did last year. Me and Ernie Glam did it last year, but now we're going to do it like the actual View. The set's going to look like The View, and we're going to have 5 gay men, and we're basically going to take the topics that they take every day on The View, and we're going to use the same topics, but we're going to give them our spin.
Oh, that sounds funny.
It's really fun.
The Pew. All right, I'll have to look for that.
Because it's like The View, only it stinks.
Yeah, only it stinks. Is that going to be an online show?
Yeah.
Well, the movie is called Glory Days, spelled D-A-Z-E, The Life and Times of Michael Alig. It is out now everywhere. Ramon said it's out and available. So for everybody listening, please check it out. I'm going to watch it this weekend.
I actually thought it was very fair. I was afraid to watch it. I cringe when I see footage of myself on screen, especially footage from back then, because I'm such a different person now. It's like I don't even recognize that person. Like, I don't even know that. You know, it's funny. I say I don't know that person because I didn't know who I was then. So now that I kind of know who I am, that, you know, it's kind of cringeworthy to watch.
Well, and the drugs certainly didn't help.
Because and I was trying to find myself through them. You know, I didn't know, since I didn't know who I was when the media said I was a genius, then I thought, well, I must be a genius. Actually, I never believed I was a genius. I thought that I had tricked everybody into thinking I was a genius. But then I thought, well, there's something genius in being able to trick everybody into thinking that you're a genius.
That's true. That's very true.
Maybe I am a genius. When they said I was a sociopath, I was like, well, I must be a sociopath. And I think probably the truth is that I'm neither. You know, nobody is either, you know, most people aren't either extreme. But, you know, it really, really hurt me when they were calling me a sociopath. I mean, it really hurt me. And I can't believe I needed my psychiatrist to explain to me, but I did. She explained that the reason they were doing that is because I committed an awful crime while I was on drugs, and then I continued using drugs in prison. And to people who didn't know me, it seemed like I was using, like I didn't care. But the reality was that I cared so much that I couldn't face reality without running away or blanketing or covering up or, you know, doing what I always did. So it wasn't until I stopped using drugs and really, really took a look at what I did and faced it that I really kind of could process it all and really take in the devastation that this whole thing has caused to so many families that will never, you know, never change. It'll never go away, you know? So,
right.
I can absolutely see how people could look at me at that time and say, you know, this person who had done something like that, and he's still completely out of his mind on drugs. He's not, you know, facing it. He's not taking responsibility for it, really. Because I wasn't taking responsibility for it, which I knew, that made me feel guilty, and that guilt fueled my low self-esteem, which made me want to do more drugs. Which it was a cycle, you know, that I really couldn't get out of.
Yeah. And, you know, the funny thing about drugs is that people think that they're taking drugs to cope. But actually, when you take drugs,
right.
You're not coping. Coping is when you're
right.
sober
exactly.
and
That's
looking
exactly
at life, you know. Yeah, it's very true. Well, Michael, and you've been clean for how many years now?
2009.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's great.
You know, I would have never been able to get any of these projects off the ground had I been on drugs, because they take up so much of your time. You're either looking for them or high, you know, and you're not productive, or you're on them and you're not productive,
right.
Or you're coming off of them and you're not productive, and then you have to look for them again. So you're never productive.
No, the drugs is a full-time job, basically.
It is. You know, they say that a good scene creates good art, and so that's why people for a long time weren't giving the club kids kind of their due, because they were saying, well, where's the great art that came out of that scene? But the reality, I think, is that the truly great scenes have no art whatsoever, because all of the artists are getting fucked up every night and going out and having fun. And, you know, it wasn't until the scene fell apart that Richie and Tobel and Paul and Larry T and Keoki, you know, these people really, you know, kind of got their acts together and did something.
Yeah, exactly. Michael, we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It was great talking to you. Mm-hmm. Best of luck with all your projects. I hope they do well.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay, take care, Michael.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guests, Ramon Fernandez and Michael Alig. And thank you to Grandpa's Chili for the song. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye.
To the